Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Science of B2B. My name is Kerry Cunningham. I head up Sixth Sense Research and Thought Leadership, and I'm a former Serious Decisions and Forrester analyst. So on the Science of B2B, we're going to be talking about all of the research that we've been doing and are doing throughout the year as we go forward. Now, it's been a while since we've done one of these videos, and that's because we've been very, very busy collecting and analyzing data and producing research reports. We're going to talk a lot about that data on the Science of B2B. So we're going to start off with a series that I call the Reality of B2B series. We're going to talk about what it's like to buy in B2B, and we're going to talk about what it's like to be marketing and selling in B2B and really get clear about what the reality of that is. Next, we'll do a series on intent. So the intent series is going to demythologize intent. It's also going to take on a lot of the myths and lies and half-truths that exist, and then tell you the truth about what it is and what it's really for. And then we'll also talk about attribution quite a bit. We'll talk about BDRs. We'll talk about all of those topics that have to do with how do we produce revenue in B2B. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Earlier in 2023, in the middle of the summer, we asked about 930 recent B2B buyers to tell us about their buying experience. And we call a report on that the Sixth Sense Buyer Experience Report. And it's pretty stunning. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done. One of the things that we learned in this report is that 70% of a buying journey is over before buyers talk to sellers. Now, what's great about that number from a researcher's perspective is that it's consistent with everything we've already heard. So there's nothing new with that number. That's what we've already heard. Many sources have said that. Why is that good? Well, that tells us that the people we're surveying are like all of the other people who've been surveyed or asked this question. They represent real B2B buyers. So that's great because the rest of what they said is pretty darn surprising. So the next question we asked them was, when you had that first contact with sellers, did you initiate that contact or did you have that contact, that direct interaction because somebody emailed you or called you or whatever it might be? 83% of the time, buyers said that they initiated that contact, right? So that's really important because one, it tells you buyers are very clearly in control of their buying journey and that they control when they're going to have a conversation with you, and it doesn't happen till really late. So one of the things that raises, one of the questions is, why? Why does it take so long? What's going on in that 70%? We're absolutely going to get into that a lot over the next few episodes. But here's a clue. The next question we asked them was, when you had that first conversation, which you initiated, you decided to have, was that first conversation with the vendor that ultimately won the business, or was it with a different vendor? 84% of the time, buyers said that that first conversation was with the vendor that ultimately won the business. So I'm going to give you two possible explanations, and then we'll dive more into it on the next episode. Here's the two possible explanations, and you'll tell that I don't think very much of the first one. So it's possible after a buying journey that on average was about 11 months long, that I had my first conversation with a seller at month 8, that I decided which vendor I would talk to first, but I picked that vendor randomly from the list of vendors that I'm looking at. And that conversation was so overwhelmingly convincing that I went with that vendor 84% of the time. That just doesn't seem too likely to me. A more likely explanation is that after 8 months out of this 11-month journey, we had reached the point as a buying team where we knew what we wanted, we knew who we wanted to buy it from, and like we all do in our normal day-to-day lives when we're making considered purchases, we had a favorite and we started with them. Everything after that is validating that decision that you've already made. There's one other number I want to give you before we finish today, and that is 78% of the time, buyers told us that they had already completely or mostly set their requirements by the time they had that first conversation with a seller. And that means not only did they choose who they're going to talk to, but they knew what they wanted already. So that validates, I think, explanation number 2 a lot. It says the reason it takes that long in the buying process before we're willing to talk to somebody is because it takes that long to decide what we want. All right, we're going to dive into it a lot more on our next episode. And in fact, in the next episode, we're going to talk more specifically about what we think of as the 70% constant. Why does it take the 70%? We'll dive into that. And then on episodes that follow, we'll talk about those form fills. What are those form fills about? And how many interactions are buyers really having throughout their journey? And then as we get through the reality of B2B buying series, we'll start moving into the intent series, attribution, and more. All right, so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.